there, and welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm Ed Vischer. Our guest today is New York State Assemblywoman Nicole Malliotakis. Nicole represents the 64th Assembly District of Staten Island and Brooklyn. Thank you very much for joining us today. As of this taping, we are fast approaching the April 1 deadline, and the attention turns to whether or not the state legislature will pass yet another consecutive on-time budget. With the budget passage comes a lot of issues. There has been an agreement in terms of the majority side of things in the New York State Assembly, and that was part of a budget resolution which was passed on Monday. So we're going to get up to speed in terms of what happened with those events. Always nice to see you, Assemblywoman.
Thank you.
So earlier in the week, the majority came forward with their budget resolution. Essentially, the Assembly majority, the Senate majority, and the governor move forward with their own spending plans, and then you tend to hash things out as the April 1 deadline approaches. What was incorporated in this year's budget proposal for the Assembly majority?
Well, I think this is actually one of the worst proposals that I've seen in my time here. It actually increases taxes. It also increases spending of approximately $2 billion over what the governor has proposed for this year's budget. Doesn't live within the spending cap, which we've adhered to for the last 5 years, every year since I've been here. And it really is a bill that contains a tremendous amount of misguided policies and reckless spending. For instance, what we see in there is, again, the DREAM Act, something that has been voted down 8 times. They want to put this, try to squeeze it in the budget. Basically, what the DREAM Act would do would be to provide taxpayer-funded tuition assistance to those who are in this country illegally. There's also an additional $10 million that was put in the budget to give health care to those who are here illegally. And yet we see no middle-class tax relief in this budget. We see very little. But then they give with one hand and they take with the other in terms of over, I think it's like $5 billion in taxes. And so unlike the Senate budget, where we're seeing, instead of the DREAM Act, we're seeing my proposal, which I was happy to see at least the Senate taking up now, which is to increase the tuition assistance program income eligibility threshold from $80,000 to $100,000. Basically, the story behind that is that they have not increased the income eligibility threshold since the year 2000. When they increased it from $50,000 to $80,000. And if you're a family of 4, if you have 3 or 4 kids to put through college, you can't do so with all the middle class expenses that you would have, a mortgage and other expenses. Putting 3, 4 kids through college on an $80,000 household income is impossible, and that's why we lead to a tremendous amount of debt. Our young people are graduating with at least $26,000 debt on average, and that's only from undergraduate. And so what the Senate has done is say we're going to increase that income eligibility threshold to $100,000 household income, so more of our middle-class citizens can qualify. That is certainly something that is a priority over the DREAM Act, and I hope that the Assembly will see that. Additionally, what we saw is language in this bill that would change entitlements, modify them so people can earn welfare without work requirements or fewer work requirements. And also, it goes as far as to say that they're not even going to look at what you have in retirement savings or college savings when coming up with your welfare benefits. So, I mean, it really is just spending the taxpayers' money frivolously. I think that this budget is a bad budget. Obviously, this is a starting point for negotiations, the 2 houses and the governor, and we'll see. But I think that we really need to pass a responsible budget that lives within the cap, reduces as much spending as possible, and tries to give money back to the taxpayers, as the Senate does. The Senate not only with the tuition assistance, but what the Senate does is actually cut middle-class income tax rates, the lowest it's been in 70 years. That's the direction we should be moving in the Assembly. Additionally, what we see in the Senate version of the bill, version of the budget, is a property tax cap for New York City, which is so important to my constituents. It's something that I and my colleagues from Staten Island, from Brooklyn, have been advocating for a few years now. And we're very disappointed that when the state passed the property tax cap, they excluded New York City because the mayor didn't want a tax cap. But when we look at the city spending, it has gone up in just the 3 years that de Blasio has been the mayor. It has gone up from $70 billion, which was the budget under Bloomberg, and then it's now they're looking at a $78 billion. So we're talking going over 10% within a 3-year period. It's a lot of spending. And so when we're seeing how the city is spending this money, I think people are very upset. And so when they get their property tax bill, as I get, very frustrated to see their money go into some bad policies on the city level.
So let me ask you, because oftentimes, at least we've seen this in recent years, particularly under the Cuomo administration, where he tends to tie in policy issues with the budget. You're concerned with that?
I'm concerned with a lot of the tactics being used by the governor. I mean, first, if we're not tying in language that for policy in the budget, which have no fiscal implication, then we're looking to circumvent the legislature by passing minimum wage bills, minimum wage increases, by using a 3-person panel instead of having the legislature vote on it. Again, we saw the other day, a move by the Board of Regents to allow individuals here illegally to be teachers and get teacher licensing. And those are issues that should be brought up for a proper debate and discussion and a vote by the legislature.
Do you feel the same way about the DREAM Act? Should that be part of the budget?
Well, the DREAM Act is a fiscal issue, so it's okay that it's part of the budget. It's just not okay that they want to actually implement it. That's my problem with the DREAM Act, is that it is not the right use of taxpayer money, especially when we're seeing so many middle-class citizens struggling to get through college, graduating with a tremendous amount of debt. And also, back in 2010, we eliminated, not me because I wasn't here at the time, but my predecessor was part of the legislature that eliminated the tuition assistance program for graduate students in this state. So if you're a graduate student, you cannot get any tuition assistance help. So our teachers, our lawyers, our doctors, those future professionals aren't able to get any assistance in the state of New York. And certainly that should be the priority and not the DREAM Act. And so my issue with the DREAM Act is really that it is a misguided policy. It's a backwards policy. It should not be the policy of the state of New York. We should be moving forward, not constantly trying to jam it down everyone's throat. Every year we vote on it 3-4 times, and it keeps getting rejected. And yet they keep bringing it up. And I think, the people of the state of New York have expressed that they don't want to see their tax dollars going to that.
We have seen the resignation and conviction of Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos, former Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos, the former Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Assembly, Sheldon Silver. And that has drawn a lot of attention to the cloud of dysfunction, if you will, that has hung over Albany for what one could argue for decades now. The Assembly majority took up a resolution on Monday, or yesterday, on Tuesday, that tended to address some of the concerns in terms of ethics reforms. Talk to us about your overall thoughts on that.
Yes, in the 5 years that I've been here, I've seen 16 of my colleagues either indicted, convicted, or forced to resign. So it's very frustrating. It's very disheartening. And obviously the laws that are on the books are working, because these people are getting convicted and they're forced to resign, and they're serving jail sentences. One of the issues that I see is that when they are convicted and they're put in jail, they're still collecting tax dollars in the form of pensions, and that is something that we need to address. It really, quite frankly, is something that should be on the ballot this year. As you know, it's a constitutional amendment that's needed, and so it needs to be approved by the voters. So it has to pass 2 consecutive legislatures and be approved. But we failed to pass it in 2014, despite so many of us who had called for that reform. We never passed it. And so now what we're looking at is, if we can get it done by the end of this session, we can get it on the ballot for 2018. What we did back in when I first got here was at least eliminate it for new members coming in. If you were new to the pension system, then you would have your pension stripped upon conviction. But yet those who have been sitting in the legislature for decades will still receive a pension. So that's why we need this constitutional amendment. So I've called for repeatedly for our House and the Senate to take up a language that can be then passed next year and then go on the ballot for 2018, so the taxpayers can have a voice on how their tax dollars are spent. The bill we passed yesterday was a step in the right direction. It closes LLC loopholes, so prohibits, just basically puts in the same contribution limits that corporations have when making contributions, instead of being able to use various LLCs with much higher contribution limits. So that was one of the issues that had come up in the trials that we saw with the Speaker and the Majority Leader. And so that was a step in the right direction. Also limits outside income for the members serving. And, it does a few other things. But, the reality is that we need to focus on the rules of how legislative business is handled right here in the Assembly. I mean, it's so easy to make a few simple rules changes, limiting the power of the Speaker, implementing term limits for leadership, ensuring that all members have equal staffing, so we're not, no one gets punished if they vote against what the Speaker wants. That's critical. Also making sure that we have more accountability for our votes. So we want committee votes to be posted online so the public can see how we vote on them. Discretionary funding, more transparency with that, and also ensuring that if a bill has 76 sponsors, it is allowed to come up for a debate, discussion, and vote. The pension forfeiture bill would be up for a vote had this been in effect right now. We can't allow one person to have so much control, and that's what the Speaker has. They just have too much control over how much staff you get, what chairmanship you get, or committees you're on, over if you're able to pass a bill or have your bill come up for a vote. Too much power by one person is what corrupts, and we saw that with Sheldon Silver, and we can't let it happen anymore.
Well, one could argue that the Assembly Republicans represent 5 million New Yorkers, and that's significant. So to have a seat at the table is important.
Well, I think that all the members, if we're able to get our colleagues to support a piece of legislation with 76 sponsors, which is the number you need to pass the bill, it should definitely come to the floor for a vote. There's no doubt about it. There should be a proper debate. We should just allow democracy to take place. I don't understand why people are afraid of actually allowing democracy to take place. We saw a bill last year that's very critical to my district. Many people very upset about it. It was the extension of the bus lanes, bus lane cameras that were really set up almost like get-rich-quick schemes. And that bill, I led the debate, believe it or not, with Sheldon Silver, even though most people, there's one bill that we actually agreed on. It was one of probably the only times we agreed on during our time here together. But we led the debate, and we almost killed the bill. We didn't have the votes. They didn't have the votes to pass it. But then leadership came on the floor, started arm twisting, started pushing the members, and lo and behold, they got just enough votes to pass the bill. And having that power, the ability to say you need to vote for this or else, is what really corrupts the process, and it takes away the democracy.
So pension forfeiture, do you think it's going to happen this year?
It has to happen. I believe there's been so much pressure placed on leadership by the rank and file members that support it, by the press, by constituents, that we really need to go home this year having passed that. And if we don't, we're doing a disservice to the people that elected us to represent them. And
your estimate at this point, always a tough call, but do you think there will be an on-time state budget this year?
I do. Look, we've had 5 years on-time budgets. I just don't want to rush the budget. I'd rather it be a day late if it needs to be a day late, to make sure that we get a better budget that serves the people properly and spends their money properly. So I do believe, though, we're headed for an on-time budget. Always good enough. And thank you very much for joining us today, Assemblywoman. And if you'd like to reach out to Assemblywoman Nicole Malliotakis, you can do so. Her information is on the screen there at 11 Maplewood Place at Staten Island, New York, 10306, 7408 Fifth Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11209. You can reach out to the Assemblywoman by calling 718-987-0197. You can email her at malliotakisn@assembly.state.ny.us, and you're also on social media? Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter. Instagram as well. You got it all covered there. Thank you very much for joining us today for this edition of Assembly Calendar. We will see you next time. Take care.